Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today we are going to go through my February wrap up. I love that I get to film this on here because usually on TikTok I have to edit it down into like a 6-minute video, so I never get to tell you my complete thoughts about the books that I've read this month. So I am so glad that I get to film a longer formed video for this today. So I read 29 books in February, so we're going to go through all of them and I will give you details and ratings on each one. I read so many books on my Kindle this month. I think I only read like 10 physical books. The rest of them are on my Kindle. So that means there was like 19 books that I read on my Kindle this month, which I really don't mind. I love utilizing Kindle Unlimited. But we'll go through all the Kindle ones first. So we are gonna start off with the Windsor series by Katharina Mora. So this series, like in a nutshell, about 6 siblings in the Windsor family. It's like this really rich billionaire family, and each one of them has to have an arranged marriage. Their grandmother finds arranged marriages for all of them and they have to marry that person. There are like these clauses in the vows that they have to follow through, and it's usually to another rich person so that they can like merge their companies together. I had heard about this series because I got an arc for Mine for a Moment by Katharina Mora, which is like a spin-off series from this. So I decided, oh, I will read the Windsor series first, and I'd heard things about it. I'd heard like people didn't like the first one, The Wrong Bride. I actually really like this one. I think it's my favorite. The Wrong Bride, The Temporary Wife, and The Unwanted Marriage are my favorites in the series. I honestly cannot remember which couples belong to which books. It's really confusing. But those ones were definitely my favorites in the series. I really loved the FMCs. All of them kind of have like really bad family members. For those of you who haven't seen this little guy before, this is my dog, Finn. He is like... Okay, of course you have to do that on camera while I'm filming. Are you done? As I was saying, Finn. This is my dog, Finn. He is a Prague Ratter and he's like my baby. He's my absolute world. So he's gonna join us today, aren't you? Now, The Broken Vows was not my favorite. This one was so much longer. It was almost 600 pages, and this one is a second chance. And the way that it started, the first half of this book was their like previous relationship. So you got like in the past, and it wasn't like flashbacks, which I don't personally mind when there's flashbacks because second chance is not my favorite trope, but flashbacks are fine. However, the whole first half of this book was their previous relationship, and I honestly just didn't care that much to get a full in-depth preview of their relationship, so I didn't love that. And so for that, my rating just went down because I was just starting to get bored. The Devious Husband also, which is the last book in the series, was not my favorite. Now I think this is genuinely because I was sick of the marriage of convenience trope by the end of this series. However, I just didn't love the main characters either. I had been anticipating this book because you kind of like see them throughout the first 5 books, so you know that their book is coming up. It just didn't hit the way that I wanted it to. I just didn't end up loving the characters in this book. I think overall this series gets a 4-star. I rated 4 out of 6 books in this series 4 stars, and then The Broken Vows and The Devious Husband I gave 3 stars to. Then I read The Edge of Darkness series. I read this because of Eureka, and if you don't know who she is Larry's mother from Larry's Reads, and I watched their video talking about like her favorite books, and she raved about this series, and then Larry ended up reading it, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna give it a go. I haven't read Lee River's book. I've heard of the book Little Stranger, I think it is, which is like really dark, and I thought I don't want to start there, also start somewhere else. So I read this series, and you guys, this series broke my heart. Okay, this is a dark romance series. It follows Cade and Stacy, and this is sort of a second chance as well because they used to have a relationship and then they broke up, but you don't know why they broke up, and so you start following their journey of like reconnecting with each other. This is dark. Please check your trigger warnings on this. You will get spoilers from some of the trigger warnings, but I wanted to look them up anyway just to see what I was in for, and I was like, okay, cool, I can handle this. I could not handle it. I didn't think there would be this much darkness. The first book wasn't as dark as I thought it was going to be. I was like, oh, this is great. It wasn't that dark. It wasn't like Hunting Adeline dark, so I was cool with it. Then you get to Restitution. That book was so damn dark. It was so dark. So I read Voracious, and then I was like, you know what? I'm going to have a break from this series, read something fluffy in between each book. I tried to do that and I couldn't because all I could think about were these characters and like what they were going through. So I decided to pick up Restitution straight away, and I loved Restitution. It was much darker. The ending of Restitution, I had to go into the third book immediately. The third book, like, dark romances don't make me cry. No, they're sad, but I just don't cry from them. I need like a really like sob storybook to cry from. I can't cry from dark romances. But this book took me on such a roller coaster of a journey. It made me cry so hard, and anytime I cry from a book, my husband's like, you're not reading that book again, like stop reading it, because he hates seeing me cry. It was so sad in a way that I had to keep reading to find out what was going on, and I just loved this series. I love the characters, I love the side characters. I would 100% read a book about every single side character. I loved Cade's parents in this. She is doing a novella for their parents, which I really like, but again, I would read a full-length novel, a 600-page book about their parents, because I loved them. It's wild, but it's amazing, and you need to read it if you love dark romance. There is a reason why people hype this series up. It is just so good. When the Moon Hatched. Now, so for the longest time I said I wasn't going to read this book. I knew that this book was really complicated, and I knew you needed a whole glossary to understand this universe. So I said for the longest time I'm not going to buy it, even though it sounds amazing, because I don't think I can do that with having a dyslexic brain. However, after Onyx Storm, I so desperately needed a dragon fantasy book, and I had been like trying other dragon fantasy books that just weren't hitting the spot for me. And I thought, so many people love this series, I'm gonna buy it, I'm gonna read it, I'm not gonna DNF it. I got 5 chapters in and didn't understand a single thing that was happening in this book, and it was getting really hard for me to continue. I didn't want to keep flipping back to the glossary, so I decided just not to do that, which I'd heard from like some of my bookish friends that was best to do, and to just go into it blindly. So I kept going, and as I kept going, I was getting bored, and I actually ended up like falling asleep for like 3 hours in the middle of a chapter because I could not take it anymore. It was boring me because I didn't understand anything. I didn't understand the universe, I didn't understand the characters. And the female main character, she wasn't my favorite female main character ever. So it was just really confusing. I can't even describe to you guys what this book is about, other than that it has dragons, because it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I ended up DNFing it, and I don't think I'll ever go back to it. Because of my disappointment from that, I decided to read the Flame and Thorn series. This is a dragon shifter series. I knew that it wasn't dragons, but I was like, dragon shifters is close enough. I mean, it's like, you know, Zodiac Academy has dragon shifters, and I love that, so I'll probably love this series. It's about this girl named Selena, and she has to enter these trials, the atonement trials, so it kind of has like this Hunger Games vibe to it. So she is Fae, and then there's Fae and dragon shifters, and they don't have a good history, and the dragon shifters really hate the Fae, so they have like an awful life, and each Fae has one sort of like magical power, and hers is to manipulate emotions, and because of that, like, people don't like her. So she enters these atonement trials because whoever enters them and wins them will be free from the dragon riders, and it's been going on for like hundreds of years. So she entered the trials, and one of the dragon shifters, who has his own clan, because there are like different clans for different colored dragons, he does not like her, and he's trying to make her lose the trials. They have sort of this like enemies to lovers thing going on. The first book was good. I enjoyed it because it like introduced me to the universe, and I really liked that. You get a sense of like what dragons there are, what kind of shifters there are. You get a sense of like each fae and what each thing about different faes means magically. I really liked the characters. It was good. The ending of it definitely made me want to read book 2, and book 2 hadn't come out yet. It came out on the 24th, so as soon as the 24th came around, I read book 2. Now book 2 was so much better. I loved this. It's really fast paced. They're not very long. They're like 370 pages each. I loved this. I loved the way the romance went in this. I love that, like, even though they're romantic with each other, they still have that like enemies aspect to it. I can't give you too much information about book 2 because it will spoil it. Things happened in this book that I knew were gonna happen, and I squealed and giggled and screamed when they happened because I was so excited. I don't usually like when a book is predictable, but in this case, I loved that it was predictable because I knew that I was right about certain things, and I loved that we finally got the truth from it. The ending of it though, I need book 3 immediately. It doesn't come out until June, soon. I'm very, very excited for when it does come out. Never Keep by the Twisted Sisters. These are the same authors that wrote Zodiac Academy, and this is their new series. I've been putting off reading this for a while just because I was still like recovering from Zodiac Academy, but my husband said, why don't you read it? So I did. This is set in the world of Solaria, which is the world of Zodiac Academy, but it does not have any correlation to Zodiac Academy whatsoever, and I could tell. The way that this book started was it just kind of threw you straight into action, which I didn't mind, but as the chapters were going along, I just had a feeling that I wasn't gonna like it. I don't know what it was. I think because it was so different from what I was expecting it to be, I just didn't like it as much. I can't really tell you what this book is about either because I didn't finish it. I DNF'd it. I probably will go back to this at some point because I really want to be able to love another one of their series, because the other two Zodiac Academy series that connect to Zodiac Academy I'm not that interested in reading, but this series I was interested in reading. So it is a DNF for now. I may pick it up again in the future. I don't know. It's kind of just like up in the air for now. So after reading Never Keep, I then decided to read Blood and Steel, and I was disappointed again because I DNF'd it. This book is basically this universe where women aren't allowed to handle blades anymore. Like they're not allowed, I think it's called blade carriers, and so this girl is training because she wants to be a blade carrier. Now it started off fine, like the first chapter or two was great. It was a little introductory, you got to know the character and like her friends, and then as the chapters went on, nothing was happening. I was like, okay, can we move it along please? And for like at least 5 chapters it was just her and her sister arguing over the stupidest things, and I thought, okay, I'm not here for the family drama. Like leave that behind, just get into the story, get into the action, get into the plot. And it was starting to bore me. I have really high expectations when it comes to fantasies because I don't always love fantasy books, so I needed to grip my attention from the first page. Because it wasn't gripping my attention and because I just didn't like the FMC or her sister, I decided to DNF it. I don't think I'll ever go back to this book. It just personally wasn't for me. I then read the Bourbon Boys series. The reason that I read this is because it is the same cover artist that drew this, that drew Wolf by Paisley Hope, and I love that cover so much. So when I saw these covers, I was like, immediately, yes, I'm going to read that. I didn't need to know a single thing about this book. In my head, it was a dark romance because Wolf was, which I know, like, that was really weird. I didn't even read it. I opened the first book, which is Bourbon and Lies, and the dedication literally said, if you need a cowboy, and I was immediately sold because I love me a good cowboy. So I was like extremely excited going into it. I loved this book so much. It has this like mystery aspect to it. So the FMC goes into witness protection program at his ranch, and he has no idea why she's there. He thinks that she's hooking up with his brother, and so they have this sort of like hate relationship at the start of it. He is a retired cop who is now a cowboy, and he lives on like a bourbon ranch. The whole town is known for their bourbon, and his family owns the bourbon. So it starts off like that. I loved it. The mystery aspects of this book were great. It was so much fun. I loved the FMC and I loved the MMC. They had such a good relationship. I loved their banter. I loved the steaminess in it. There is smut in this. It's quite high on the smut scale actually, which usually I don't like, but I didn't mind it in this. It is quite long, but personally it just didn't feel long. It just flowed really well. I loved like the uncoverings of things in this. There were definitely a lot of secrets that I was like, okay, I need to find out, so I kept on reading. I highly recommend this one. The second one, Bourbon and Secrets, is sort of like a, she comes back to town, they have a bad history, he's a single dad, there are some things between them that nobody else knows about, and so it goes from there. Personally, this one wasn't as good as the first one. I didn't particularly love the FMC. I also wish I could have seen more of her interacting with his kids. He's a single dad with 2 girls, and I personally just didn't see enough of a relationship between them to see her going into being their mother, if that makes sense. So I wish I could have seen him and her and the girls doing more. She definitely was around them a lot, but I didn't see her like form personal connections with them like I would have liked to. I also think it went from hating each other to having a physical relationship too quickly. I think I would have liked to see them sort of form a friendship and a bond first before it immediately went into the physical side, I think that degraded their chemistry for me, because it just felt very physical instead of like emotional and connection. It wasn't my favorite. I still loved it, don't get me wrong, it was a great book, but it wasn't my favorite. I'm so excited for the third book to come out though. That one, I just know is going to be so good. I know the banter in that book is going to be amazing. I can't wait to see what the cover looks like either. It's going to be a banger. The last book I read on my Kindle was Reign of Shadows and Endings. This is the first book in the Legacy series. I haven't heard too much about this series, but I have heard it float around Book Talk a little bit, and it was targeted to me as a dark fantasy. There are fae and there are legacies and there are gods, and so like the gods created the fae and the legacy, and the legacy are humans that have a particular power that the gods have given them, but in able to get that power they have to be sourced from a fae. So the fae were created to give their power to the legacies to kind of protect their universe, and so there is this sourcing selection that happens once every like 100 something years, and the legacy have to choose a fae that they are then bonded to. They are bonded to through their magic, and like they can speak to each other in each other's minds, and their desires become each other's desires. So like they are completely bonded. The FMC picks this girl to bond to, and she was not expecting to be bonded to. It starts off with her kind of hating him and like rejecting the bond, and it goes from there. There was not 1 ounce of darkness in this book, and maybe it's just like the first book isn't a dark fantasy, but it completely threw off my expectations after that. Half of this book was them just hating each other, or more her hating him and him trying to get her to live with the fact that he has like made her do this. And so like you don't really get much from them, to be honest. Like it was kind of like a whole lot of nothing for the first 300 pages. His name is also Theon, and all I could think about was Theon Greyjoy from Game of Thrones, and if you've watched Game of Thrones, you know like Theon just becomes a coward and a puppy, and so from that all I could picture was Theon from Game of Thrones, and I just didn't like him. Then he opens his mouth. This man like could not be more of a controlling asshole if he tried to. I could not stand him. The things he said to her, and he like had no idea that he was doing anything wrong, and even his friends were saying to him like, chill, leave her be, like let her just do what she wants to for a little bit. This is too much, you are being too much. And he was like, no, I'm not. Like he genuinely could not see where he was at fault. And so I didn't really like him. I kept going with this book though, because I was like, okay, like, are we gonna keep moving? Are secrets gonna be untold? Are we gonna get any information? And like, it was fine overall, but personally, it just wasn't that great. And I really don't think I will continue the series because I have no desire to. Finally getting onto physical books that I read, now that we've gone through the 19 books I read on my Kindle. The Final Rose by Amy Oliveira. The only reason I read this is because this version is part of the Probably Smut Book of the Month, and I forgot to cancel it. So I thought I may as well read it. This is supposed to be like The Bachelor, so he is like this English dude that goes on this show to meet these women, and she is one of the people that works on the show, and they meet like that. This book is tiny. It is 200 pages. For me, you can't form a relationship and execute a relationship and have like a third act breakup or whatever it is, or conflict and resolutions within 200 pages. It's just not possible. So for me, I really didn't have high expectations of this, and the book completely showed me that. I hated this. It was crap. Honestly, it was so slow. It was really slow. And for it to be 200 pages, was like, this cannot be slow. It was 100 pages in, nothing was happening. I was like, you have literally 100 pages to form a relationship, to form tension and angst, to form conflict and form a resolution and a future within 100 pages. It did not work. No part of this book worked. I Bet You Look Good in a Coffin by Katie Brent. Now, this is the second book to How to Unalive Men and Get Away with It, which I read last year, I think, and I really loved it. She has decided she is not going to do her extra job anymore, and so she decides not to do this. But then this guy called Blaze Bundy is online, and he is anonymous, and he is talking awfully about women, and she really hates it. And she ends up going to France for her mother's wedding, and she realizes that Blaze is going after her. So she has to kind of come up with a plan while she's in France, even though she's trying not to do the job that she used to do, and her boyfriend has no idea about it, and it goes from there. I really liked this. It wasn't as good as the first book, and to be honest, the ending of this book really disappointed me. I'm kind of hoping there's going to be a third book in this series, because I just refuse to accept the ending of it. The twists in this book I did not see coming, and I really love that about this book. It's not predictable. I honestly don't know if you guys can see my little dog. Can you see him? He's just like down there living his best life. So overall I enjoyed it, but it wasn't my favorite out of the series. The One Who Knows Me by Joan Imbola. Now this is a Christian fiction book. This is actually the first fiction book that I've read. I usually stick to non-fiction when it comes to Christian books, but I decided to read this. I loved this. I think it was beautiful. I loved the way that it dealt with grief. Both the FMC and the MMC have gone through grief, and so that's how they connect. They kind of like bump into each other, and then they become friends, and they're in the same classes, and then they both realize that they're Christians, and they both talk about their grief, and it goes from there. The FMC is struggling with her Christianity while she's going through some really bad personal stuff. I loved the romance. I loved the chemistry. Again, I loved how it dealt with the grief. P.S. I Hate You by Lauren Connolly. I got sent this by the publisher. Now, this is about a girl whose brother passed away, and they're reading out his will, and in his will, he has letters for each of his family members and his friends. She gets a letter that is also meant for his best friend as well, which she and him don't have a good past because it is a second chance and they now hate each other. And in his letter to them, he said that he wants them to spread his ashes in all of the states that he didn't end up going to before he died. And once they get to the state that he has asked them to go to, there will be a letter for them to open with directions on what he wants them to do with his ashes. I thought it was a really cool concept. I'd never heard anything like this before, so I thought it was very interesting. I loved the road trip aspect of it, and the things that her brother put in the letters and the things that he made them do. I thought they were really funny. I thought, you know, it was really nice for the FMC because it felt like her brother was still there with them. The romance was not my favorite. I honestly wasn't that focused on it, but I personally just didn't like them together. I didn't think it was the best relationship I'd ever read about. I just didn't find it believable. And so I didn't really like that, but I loved the actual storyline of it, and I thought that that was a really interesting concept. My Dark Prince by LJ Shannon Parker S. Huntington. I love this series so much, and I predicted that this book was going to be a 5-star. However, it was not. It was a 4.5. This one is about Ollie and Briar, and they used to have a relationship, and then the relationship ends and she moves away and they don't see each other again until one day she kind of comes back to their town, and she gets into an accident and loses all of her memory, and the doctor tells Ollie that he has to look after her, and she is convinced that they are engaged, so he has to play along with it, and he takes her home, and she's obviously lost her memory. She thinks she's engaged to him, but she starts to suspect some things that aren't going right, and she realizes that she's actually trapped in his house. This man is hilarious. The banter in these books is so funny. I love the text message threads between the guys from this series because it's absolutely hilarious. However, the actual relationship was not my favorite. There is a side character in this book that I really can't tell you anything about, otherwise it will give you major spoilers. I did not like that character. I did not like how that character made Ollie feel. I feel like if that hadn't happened, so much in Ollie's life would be different and so much would have been better for him. So I really hated how much control that character had over Ollie, and therefore it stopped his relationship with Briar. And because of that, I just didn't think their relationship was like that great. I still loved them. Do not get me wrong, this book was fantastic and I loved it. However, I had minor issues with it, and I just wish those minor issues weren't in there. Otherwise, I would have given it a 5 stars like I did the first 2 books. Finding Hayes by Laura Pavlov. This is the last book in the series, and it's a Marriage of Convenience book. I read this right after reading the Windsor series, and because I literally just read 6 Marriage of Convenience books, I was sick of that trope, and I didn't realize this was a Marriage of Convenience. So when I got to it, I was like, I don't want to read this. I did not want to read it at all. So I put it off for a few days and then decided to pick it up. This is my least favorite in the series. I did really like it, but it wasn't the best. This is also a second chance. So she inherits this estate, but in order to get it, she has to be married. So they decide to have a marriage of convenience. It will look like, you know, she came back to the small town and they rekindled things. The way that this went, I feel like it went from friendship to, again, physical too quickly. Like, they hated each other, and then it just went to physical and then went back to friendship. And so I didn't see them forming enough of a connection. The connection that they did have, I found completely platonic. It just felt like they were friends. I didn't see the romance there. I didn't particularly love it. I love all the side characters. I loved the things that happened in this book. I love Beefcake. He is my favorite character in every single one of these books. Beefcake is the little kid in the series. That part of it was great. However, the romance just wasn't my favorite. I'm now realizing I genuinely didn't have that many good reads this month, and I also didn't have a 5-star. I need a 5-star next month. Like, I need to have one. The Charlie Method by Elle Kennedy. This is the last book in the Campus Diaries series, and this is a why choose book. Why choose is one of my least favorite tropes. I just don't like it. I had no idea how this story was gonna go. We obviously know from previous books that Beckett and Will share girls, but going into this, I didn't know if they were going to end up sharing a girl and that just be it, or if they were going to form their own romance. So I didn't know what to expect going into this with that. So they meet Charlie on like this online hookup app, and she starts talking to them, and then she goes to meet them and realizes she knows them and she's not a fan. She thinks it's really weird at the start, but they obviously don't. Because it took her so long to accept the idea of being with 2 guys, it felt so awkward at the start of this book, because she was just trying to convince herself that this wasn't normal and that nobody would accept it, and like her desires were completely wrong. And so it made their interactions really awkward. I didn't love this. I don't even know why I rated it 3 stars, because it just was my least favorite Elle Kennedy book, but that's just because I don't like Why Choose. I think if you love Why Choose, you'll love this. Ben did a reread of ACOTAR. Now, I read ACOTAR 3 years ago. So it's been like a really, really long time since I've read this series, and I just wanted to go back to the world of Alaris and be with Rhys and Nefera again. So I decided to do a reread. I was really nervous about doing my reread for this because I didn't know if I was going to love it as much as I did the first time. I'm having to hold them with one hand like this because my dog is lying on me and wanting belly rubs, and what he wants he gets. I didn't want my love for it to change, because out of all of Sarah J Maas's books, these are the only books that I like. I hate Throne of Glass. I'm sorry if that offends anyone. I really hate that series. And I really didn't like Crescent City. So rereading it, I was nervous to see if my love for it would change. I can confirm that it did. When I got to ACOTAR, I was nervous, then I read it and I was like, I remember why I love this series so much. This is great. Then I got to ACOMAF, and again, I was like, okay, I'm loving this. I'm obviously loving Rhys and Nefera. It wasn't as good as I remembered it to be. Then we got to ACO War, and these books are chunky, okay? And by the time I got to ACO War, I think I was maybe like 200 pages in and I was over it. I just didn't want to continue it anymore. I don't know why. I don't know what it was about the book, but I just wasn't loving it anymore. But they are honestly the only parts of ACOTAR that I actually enjoy. The rest of what happens in the books, I could care less about. What I don't like about the novella is you get POVs from other characters. So you get like Cassian, Nesta, Azriel, like you get other characters' POVs. When it comes to Cassian and Nesta's POV, it switches to 3rd person. Like all of these books were in 1st person, and then this switches to 3rd, which I realized actually is the same for A Court of Silver Flames. I don't know why Sarah J Maas decided to do that, because I hate third person, and she also decides not to say whose POV it is in A Court of Silver Flames. And because of the fact that like of how Nesta acts in these books, I can't stand her. She is awful to favorite. I couldn't care less about her redemption arc, so I decided not to read A Court of Silver Flames. I don't think I will ever reread that book because she is just my least favorite character. The way she treats Feyre, the way she treats other people, there's just no exception for it. And yes, her redemption arc is good, but it's just not my favorite, and I just can't see past all of the stuff that she's done. Akatar, I think I gave it 3.5. Akamath, I gave 4 stars. Akawar, 4 stars, and Akafas, I think was 3.5 stars. So I do still love these, but I just don't love them as much as I used to remember, and that's how I want to remember them, how I read them the first time. And that was every single book that I read in February. I wish there had been some better ratings on books, and I wish some of the books lived up to the expectations that I had, but overall I don't think I had too bad of a month. I mean, I got to read a lot of books, which was great. We'll see what March has in store for us. I honestly have no idea what like half the books I'm going to read in March, so we'll just see. But thank you guys so much for watching, and if you could like and subscribe, that would be amazing, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.